As of November 2022, it cost $103 billion to maintain the debt, which is 11% of the total federal spending. The national debt has increased every year over the past 10 years. Here's the thing though, the US dollar is the world's #1 reserve currency. How on earth did we get ourselves into this much debt? In this video, let's understand how America gets into debt, who is lending us money, and how it directly affects the value of our money, our retirement fund, and investments. Let's begin by understanding how the government ends up getting into debt and who lends it money. When the government spends more than the taxes it receives, it borrows money from other sources, such as other government agencies and foreign countries. When they borrow money, they issue treasury bills, treasury notes, and treasury bonds. For those of you who don't know, treasury bonds pay a fixed rate of interest every 6 months until they mature. They are issued in a term of 20 years or 30 years. Treasury bonds are short-term government securities with maturities ranging from a few days to 52 weeks. Some agencies, like the Social Security Trust Fund, take in more revenue from taxes than they spend. These agencies then invest in U.S. treasuries rather than put their cash in the bank. They redeem their treasury notes for funds as needed. If the government agency collects their funds and the federal government doesn't have the money, they either raise taxes or issue more debt to raise the cash. Debt owed to other government agencies is called intragovernmental debt. The second type of debt is public debt. This is what the government owes to Treasury investors. These investors include people in the U.S., international investors, and foreign governments. If you invest in a treasury with a plan to redeem that for cash when you retire, that means you just lent your money to your own government. That being said, many people still wonder why not just print money instead of going into debt. The short answer is this: if the government keeps on printing money to fulfill its obligation, we will sink the economy because our money will lose its value. Here's a more detailed explanation. Let's take a potato as an example. Let's say it costs $1 a pound. Since Americans love potatoes, each of us buys 1 pound of potatoes a month. That means the value of $1 is 1 pound of potatoes. Let's assume that the government prints more money and doubles your salary. Now you can buy more pounds of potatoes. However, others have also doubled their salaries, so everyone wants to buy more potatoes now. The demand for potatoes is up, so the suppliers of potatoes increase the price to, let's say, $2 per pound. You are paying more for the potatoes than you used to. I know what you're thinking, let's just produce more potatoes. I have no doubt that will happen, but they'd have to hire people to work in the farms, and the higher demand for workers would likely raise their wage. Also, workers will see the inflation around them and want higher dollar wages so they can continue to buy as much corn as before. Money is in fact a facilitator of exchange between people, a middleman in a trade. If goods could trade with goods directly without a middleman, we would not need money. If you print more money, you simply affect the terms of trade between money and goods, nothing else. What used to cost just $1 now costs $2, that's all. Nothing fundamental or real has changed. Now that we understand why and how the government gets into debt, let's discuss who the biggest debtors of the U.S. government are and how they could possibly affect your money, savings, and retirement fund. By the end of 2021, the federal government had more than $28 trillion in federal debt. While the $30 trillion figure by itself doesn't seem to mean anything, it will help if we peg it against certain measures. First, Social Security is the government's biggest debtor by a long shot. Social Security trusts held more than $2.9 trillion in treasuries as of 2021. The next largest agency was the Military Retirement Fund at more than $1 trillion. Other large holders of debt include the Office of Personnel Management, Retirement, and Medicare. Listen and listen well. If you were to add the debt held by Social Security and all retirement and pension funds, almost half of the U.S. Treasury debt is held in trust for retirement. Current and future retirees would be hurt the most if the U.S. ever defaulted on its debt. That's you, your partner, parents, your kids, that's every American. Next is the public debt. Public debt is about as large as the economy. In a decade or less, it'll be larger than any time since World War II. Imagine yourself, you own $5,000 in assets, but you also have a debt of $5,000. That's where our entire country is right now. We owe Japan more than $1.3 trillion in US Treasuries. It is the largest foreign holder of national debt. The second largest holder is China. We owe them $1.07 trillion. Third place is the UK at $699 billion. The good news is that both Japan and China want to keep the value of the dollar higher than the value of their own currencies. This helps to keep their exports to the US affordable, which helps their economies grow. The United States ratio of debt to GDP, the measure most commonly used to gauge a country's level of indebtedness, places it among the most indebted countries in the world. According to data gathered by the World Bank last year, the country with the world's highest debt to GDP ratio is Japan, which carries debt equivalent to 257% of its economic output. Other developed economies with very high debt to GDP ratios include Greece at 207% and Italy at 155%. The US comes in at 12th place with a ratio of 133%. Here's the kicker. $30 trillion in debt is beyond ridiculous, but most politicians don't really care. Why? Because they won't be paying for it. Someone else will. It won't be them, it'll probably be us and our children and our children's children. This is not to say a national debt is ultimately bad. In a recession, tax revenues fall and you need more money for social programs such as unemployment insurance, so the government should go into a deficit in a scenario like that to keep things afloat, I guess. But these deficits during hard times should be balanced by surpluses during good times so that over the long term the government budget remains in balance. Some say you can compare it to a household or companies. It depends on what you are doing with the money you borrow. For example, it can make sense if you're to borrow money to pay for college or professional school because higher education increases your lifetime earning potential. For many people, the increase in expected earnings more than compensates for the cost of the debt. The same logic explains why companies take on debt. If you want to build a new factory for your faster-than-light hovercraft, you don't want to have to wait 20 years until you've accumulated enough profit from your sublight hovercraft to pay for it. You want to borrow the money now, build the factory, and use the gigantic profits from the faster-than-light hovercraft to pay back the debt. However, we can't just take on as much debt as we want. The key issue is fiscal sustainability, the ability of a government to pay off its debt in the future, essentially by shifting its current obligations onto future taxpayers. If the government gets too large, the government will eventually face a choice between several unpopular measures, including defaulting on the debt or imposing severe austerity in order to afford the debt payment. I hope this provides a better understanding on why and how the national debt keeps on growing. I hope that all this information will come together and help you understand exactly why you can't rely on cash savings to provide you a better life, especially after retirement. In the next video, let's talk about the debt ceiling and how the U.S. debt directly affects you.